The kitchen was my sanctuary, even when it reeked of rancid oil and unwashed dishes left by those who considered themselves too valuable to clean up after themselves. I stood at the scarred wooden counter, my hands moving mechanically through the motions of kneading dough, feeling the resistance give way beneath my palms. Outside, thunder rumbled like a warning, and rain lashed against the windows with such violence it seemed the sky itself was angry. Tonight was the Harvest Moon Gathering, the annual event where unmated wolves from surrounding packs congregated in hopes of finding their destined partner. The air thrummed with anticipation, with desperation, with the primal need that drove our kind together. I could hear them preparing upstairs, the giggling Omega females with their perfumes and silk dresses, the confident betas strutting about, even the few alphas who'd traveled from distant territories, their dominance rolling off them in waves that made my stomach clench with instinctive submission. I wouldn't be attending, of course. I never did. The flour dusted across my forearms was pale against my skin, almost as pale as my wheat blonde hair that I kept tied back in a practical braid. No one wanted a defective Omega. That's what Elder Miriam had called me when my first heat never came at 16, then 17, then 18. Now, at 22, I was an anomaly, a broken thing that served a purpose only in the kitchens and laundry rooms of the Clearwater Pack. "Making yourself useful, I see," came a sharp voice from the doorway. Cassandra, the pack's most celebrated Omega, stood there in a dress the color of fresh blood. Her dark eyes raked over me with undisguised contempt. Good. At least you know your place. I kept my gaze lowered, my hands still working the dough. Submission was safer than defiance. The delegation from the northern ranges will be here within the hour, she continued, examining her painted nails. I expect the food to be perfect. This is the most important night of the season, and I won't have you ruining it with your mediocre cooking. Mediocre. The word stung, though I'd heard worse. My cooking was the only thing about me that anyone valued, the single skill that kept me from being cast out entirely. I'd learned from watching, from experimenting in the quiet hours before dawn when the kitchen was mine alone, from pouring all the love and care I had nowhere else to direct into every dish I prepared. "Yes, Cassandra," I murmured. She lingered a moment longer, perhaps hoping I'd show some spark of rebellion she could report to the pack leaders, then swept away in a cloud of jasmine perfume that made my nose itch. I returned my attention to the bread, shaping it into rounds that would bake into golden, crusty loaves. The repetitive motion soothed something jagged inside me, the same way it always did. In the kitchen I had control. In the kitchen I had purpose. The thunder grew louder, closer, and the lights flickered. Through the window, I could see dark shapes moving between the trees, wolves arriving for the gathering. My heart beat faster despite myself, despite knowing that none of them were coming for me, that none of them ever would. A memory surfaced unbidden, my mother's face, tired and worn, her hand gentle on my cheek. "Your worth isn't determined by what others see, little one," she'd whispered during one of my darkest moments. "It's determined by what you choose to give." She'd died the following winter, pneumonia taking her before I could truly understand what she meant. I chose to give through food. It was all I had. By the time the first guests began arriving, I had 3 courses prepared and waiting. Roasted venison with herbs gathered from the forest, root vegetables caramelized to bring out their sweetness, the bread still warm, with butter I'd churned myself, and for dessert, a berry tart that had taken hours to perfect, the crust so flaky it would dissolve on the tongue. I wasn't allowed in the great hall where the gathering took place, but I could hear the music starting, the sound of laughter and conversation rising like a tide. I plated the first course with hands that barely trembled, arranging everything with a care that bordered on reverence, then stepped back as the servers came to carry it away. "Smells amazing," one of them, a kind beta named Thomas, said with a genuine smile. "You've outdone yourself." "Thank you," I whispered, feeling warmth bloom in my chest at the simple kindness. Alone again, I began preparing the second course, my movements practiced and sure. The kitchen was hot from the ovens, and I'd long since rolled up my sleeves and resigned myself to the sweat that dampened my hairline. This was my element, my world, and here I could pretend that I mattered. The storm outside intensified, wind howling around the building's corners like a living thing. The lights flickered again, and this time they stayed dim for several seconds before strengthening. Unease prickled down my spine, though I couldn't say why. Perhaps it was simply the atmospheric pressure, the electricity in the air that came before lightning struck, or perhaps it was something else entirely. A crash of thunder so loud it shook the building made me jump, my knife slipping and nicking my finger. I hissed in pain, watching blood well up, bright and red. Before I could reach for a cloth, the kitchen door slammed open with such force it cracked against the wall. The wind had done it, I thought at first. Just the wind. But then I saw him. He stood in the doorway, backlit by lightning that turned his silhouette into something otherworldly. Rain poured off him in sheets, soaking his dark clothes, plastering his black hair to his skull. He was massive, taller than any wolf I'd ever seen, broader, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire room despite the kitchen's generous size. Power radiated from him in waves so intense, I felt my knees weaken with the instinctive need to submit, to bow, to acknowledge a dominance that eclipsed anything I'd ever encountered. But it was his eyes that froze me in place. Golden, luminous, and utterly, devastatingly alone. He looked at me, truly looked, and I forgot to breathe. Forgot the blood dripping from my finger. Forgot that I was nothing, nobody, a broken omega who belonged in shadows and silence. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel, like something unused to gentleness. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The air between us crackled with something I didn't understand, something that made my heart race and my skin flush with heat that had nothing to do with the ovens. He took a step forward, water pooling beneath his boots, and I finally found my voice. "I'm nobody, sir," I managed, the words barely above a whisper. I'm just the cook." His eyes narrowed, gold intensifying as if lit from within. "Just the cook," he repeated. And something in his tone made it sound like he didn't believe me at all. Lightning struck again, so close the thunder was instantaneous, and in that flash of white light, I saw something cross his face. Recognition, perhaps, or shock, or something far more dangerous. He moved closer, each step deliberate, predatory, and I realized with mounting terror and inexplicable hope that he wasn't here for the gathering in the great hall. He was here for something else entirely. "What's your name?" he demanded, and it was a demand, an alpha command that made my wolf whimper inside me even as some rebellious part of my soul wanted to resist. "Elena," I whispered, and watched his expression transform into something that looked almost like devastation. The storm raged on outside, but inside the kitchen, in the space between us, the world had narrowed to nothing but his golden eyes and the inexplicable certainty that my life had just changed forever. He didn't move, but his gaze dropped to my hand, to the blood still dripping from my finger onto the floor. Something flickered across his face. Concern, perhaps, or hunger. With our kind, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. "You're hurt," he said, and the roughness in his voice had softened into something almost gentle. "It's nothing," I replied automatically, finally grabbing a kitchen towel and pressing it against the small wound. "Just careless." "Careless," he echoed, and I couldn't decipher the emotion behind the word. He stood there, this massive stranger dripping rainwater onto my clean floor, studying me like I was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "You said you're the cook?" "Yes, sir." The title came naturally. Everything about him demanded respect, deference, acknowledgement of a hierarchy as old as our species itself. "I prepare the meals for the pack, and you're not attending the gathering?" His head tilted slightly, a predatory gesture that made my pulse quicken. I'm not suitable for such events." The admission burned like shame in my throat, but it was the truth. Better to say it plainly than have him discover it himself. "I serve better purposes here." His jaw tightened. "Who told you that?" The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked before. It was simply understood, an accepted fact of my existence. "Everyone," I said finally. "It's just how things are." "How things are?" He repeated my words again, a habit I was beginning to notice, as if testing them for truth. "And you accept this, did I?" I'd never really considered the alternative. Acceptance was survival. Acceptance meant I had a place. However small, however hidden. I'd have nothing. I accept what I cannot change, I said quietly, turning back to my workstation. The second course needed my attention, and standing here talking to this overwhelming stranger was dangerous in ways I couldn't articulate. I'm sorry, sir, but I have duties to attend to. The guests will be expecting. My name is Nathaniel. The name fell between us like a stone into still water, creating ripples I could feel but not see. And I'm not a guest. I froze, the ladle in my hand suddenly heavy. Not a guest. The words rearranged themselves in my mind, taking on new weight, new meaning. The Northern Ranges delegation. Could he be? You're the Lichen King, I breathed, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Everyone had heard the stories. Nathaniel Ironwood, the last of the pure Lichen bloodline, a king without a kingdom since the massacre that had destroyed his pack 15 years ago. He lived alone in the northern mountains, emerging only for matters of grave importance, maintaining treaties through reputation and fear rather than presence. Some said he was half feral from isolation. Others claimed he was the most powerful shifter alive, capable of transformations that made regular wolves look like puppies in comparison, and he was standing in my kitchen, looking at me like I was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. Just Nathaniel, he said, and there was something almost pleading in his tone. Please. The word, please, from someone like him, to someone like me, felt wrong, unnatural, like the world had tilted on its axis. I should go, he continued, but he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he moved closer to where I stood, close enough that I could smell rain and pine, and something wilder underneath, something that made my broken Omega instincts stir in confusion. I came here tonight because tradition demanded it, because the pack leaders extend invitations every year that I refuse, and this year... He paused, golden eyes searching mine. This year, something told me to come. My heart hammered against my ribs. The gathering is in the Great Hall, I managed. You should... I can smell them from here, he interrupted, his nose wrinkling slightly. Perfume and desperation and performance. I've been to 100 such gatherings, Elena. They're all the same. He'd used my name. The sound of it in his rough voice did something strange to my insides, made them flutter and twist. But this... He gestured around the kitchen, at the steam rising from pots, at the organized chaos of my workspace, at me with my flour-dusted apron and simple braid. This is real. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease, the thunder growing more distant, though rain still pattered steadily against the windows. What are you making? He asked, nodding toward the stove. Mushroom soup with thyme and cream, I answered, grateful for the return to familiar territory. And roasted root vegetables with a honey glaze. The venison course has already been served. You made all of this? Alone? Yes. I stirred the soup, checking the consistency. It's what I do. It smells incredible. He moved closer still, and I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. This close, I could see the flecks of amber in his golden irises, could see the faint scars that marked his hands and forearms, evidence of battles I could only imagine. May I taste it? The request was so unexpected, so at odds with everything about this surreal encounter, that I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I ladled a small amount into a bowl and handed it to him with a spoon, hyper-aware of how our fingers brushed during the exchange. He brought the spoon to his lips, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for his verdict with an anxiety that surprised me. Why did I care what he thought? Why did his opinion matter when I'd long since accepted that my worth was purely functional? His eyes closed as he tasted the soup, and an expression of such pure, unguarded pleasure crossed his face that I felt heat rise to my cheeks. When he opened his eyes again, they were brighter, almost glowing. This is extraordinary, he said. And it didn't sound like flattery, it sounded like truth. You have a gift. It's just soup. I protested weakly. It's not just anything. His intensity pinned me in place. There's love in this. Care. I can taste it. My throat tightened with emotion I had no right to feel. You should join the gathering, I said, desperate to return to normalcy, to the safe predictability of my invisible existence. There are many worthy Omegas there. Beautiful, accomplished. I don't want worthy, he cut me off, and the finality in his tone silenced my protests. I don't want beautiful or accomplished. I've met 1,000 worthy, beautiful, accomplished wolves, Elena, and every single one of them looked at me and saw a king, a prize, a means to an end. He set the bowl down with exaggerated care, as if afraid he might break it. You looked at me and saw a man standing in the rain. I don't understand, I whispered. Neither do I, he admitted, and the vulnerability in those 3 words cracked something open inside my chest. But I'd like to. Will you let me stay, just for a while? Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to send him away, to protect myself from whatever this was. But there was something in his eyes, that profound loneliness I'd recognized immediately because I knew it so intimately myself, that made refusal impossible. I need to finish preparing the second course, I said instead. But if you want to stay, I won't send you away. Or... The smile that transformed his face was small, almost shy, and completely devastating. Thank you. He settled himself on a stool near the counter, watching as I returned to my work, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, the kitchen didn't feel like a sanctuary, because I was hiding. It felt like a sanctuary because I wasn't alone. The comfortable silence that fell between us was broken only by the sounds of cooking, the sizzle of vegetables, the gentle bubbling of soup, the rhythmic chopping of herbs. Nathaniel didn't speak, but his presence filled the space in a way that should have been oppressive, but somehow wasn't. Tell me about your pack, he said eventually, his voice careful, curious. I hesitated, unsure how much truth to share. Clearwater is stable, well-organized. The Alpha, Donovan, maintains strong alliances with neighboring territories. That's what you'd tell a stranger seeking political information, Nathaniel observed. I'm asking what it's like for you, Elena who cooks, Elena who isn't suitable for gatherings. The perceptiveness of the question made my hands still. No one had ever asked me that before. No one had ever cared about my experience of pack life beyond whether I performed my duties adequately. It's lonely, I admitted, the word escaping before I could stop it. Even surrounded by people, it's lonely. I don't fit anywhere. I'm not alpha or beta, and I'm a broken omega, so I exist in the spaces between, useful, but not valued, present, but not seen. I see you, he said quietly, and the weight of those 3 words nearly undid me. I forced myself to keep working, to maintain the rhythm that had sustained me through countless dark moments. You're the lichen king, I said, trying to inject some lightness into my tone. You're supposed to see everything. I've been king for 15 years, he countered, and in all that time, through all those gatherings and meetings and political performances, I've felt nothing but duty and obligation. Until tonight, until a bleeding omega in a kitchen looked at me like I was just a man in need of shelter from the storm. The vegetables were done. I plated them with hands that trembled slightly, arranging them with the same care I always did, then stepped back as Thomas appeared to collect them. His eyes widened when he saw Nathaniel, and he executed a clumsy bow that made me wince. Your Majesty, Thomas stammered. We didn't know you'd arrived. Alpha Donovan will want to. I'll make my presence known in due time, Nathaniel interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. For now, I'm exactly where I wish to be. Thomas looked between us, confusion evident on his face, but he was smart enough not to question a lichen king. He took the dishes and fled, and I knew with certainty that within minutes, everyone would know that Nathaniel Ironwood was in the kitchen with the defective omega. The implications of that made my stomach clench with anxiety. They'll talk, I said quietly. This will reflect poorly on you. Let them talk. His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. I stopped caring about appearances the night I buried my entire pack and walked away with nothing but survival. The rawness of the statement stole my breath. I'd heard about the massacre in whispers, in fragments, but never the full story, never from someone who'd lived through it. I'm sorry, I offered. Inadequate, but sincere. Don't be sorry, he said. Be here, be real. That's all I ask. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind the clean smell of rain-washed earth and the gentle patter of water dripping from eaves. Inside, in my kitchen, a king sat watching me work, and for the first time in my life, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was exactly where I belonged. The gathering ended near midnight, the hall gradually emptying as wolves either paired off or departed in disappointment. I'd served the final course, the berry tart that had drawn genuine exclamations of delight from the servers who'd tasted it and was now elbow-deep in washing dishes, when Nathaniel finally spoke again after a long, companionable silence. "Where do you sleep?" he asked. The question was innocent enough, but something about it made my cheeks warm. "There's a small room off the back of the kitchen. It's comfortable." "Show me." It wasn't a command, quite, but it held enough authority that I found myself drying my hands and leading him through the narrow corridor to my quarters. I'd never been embarrassed by the simplicity of my space before. The narrow bed with its worn quilt, the single shelf holding my few possessions, the cracked mirror on the wall, but seeing it through his eyes, I felt the poverty of it acutely. "This is where they house you." His voice had gone dangerously quiet. "This? It's fine," I said quickly. "It's warm and dry, and I have privacy. Many Omegas share quarters. Many Omegas are valued members of their pack." The anger simmering beneath his words was barely contained. "This is a storage closet with a bed in it, Elena. This is how they show you your worth." I had no defense for that, because he was right. The room was barely large enough to turn around in, the ceiling so low that Nathaniel had to duck his head. There was no window, no natural light, nothing to suggest that a living person occupied this space rather than spare linens or cleaning supplies. "I should speak with your Alpha," Nathaniel said, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "No!" The word came out sharper than I'd intended, propelled by fear. "Please don't. It will only make things worse for me after you leave." His jaw worked, muscles jumping beneath skin. "After I leave," he repeated, and something about the way he said it made it sound like a foreign concept. "And where do you think I'm going? Back to your territory, I assume. Your business here, my business here," he interrupted, "has just begun." Before I could parse the meaning of that cryptic statement, footsteps echoed in the hallway beyond the kitchen. Heavy, authoritative footsteps that I recognized immediately. Alpha Donovan. "Here," I whispered urgently, grabbing Nathaniel's arm without thinking, then immediately releasing it as if burned. "You shouldn't be found in my quarters. The implications—" "I don't care about implications." But he allowed me to usher him back into the kitchen proper, just as Donovan appeared in the doorway, flanked by two of his betas. The Alpha was a large man, barrel-chested and graying at the temples, with eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes moved from me to Nathaniel and back again, assessing, calculating. "Your Majesty," Donovan said, executing a bow that was respectful but not subservient. "We've been looking for you. When you didn't appear in the Great Hall, we feared something had happened." "Nothing happened," Nathaniel replied, his tone neutral. "I simply found more interesting company elsewhere." Donovan's gaze sharpened on me, and I saw the exact moment he understood. His expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, confusion, and finally something that looked almost like calculation. "Elena is one of our most dedicated workers," Donovan said carefully. "I hope she's been hospitable. Very." Nathaniel's single word was laden with meaning I didn't fully understand. "I'd like to speak with you privately, Donovan, about arrangements." "Of course. My office is—" "Tomorrow." Nathaniel cut him off. "Tonight, I require rest." "I trust you have suitable accommodations prepared?" "The best guest quarters," Donovan assured him. "I'll have someone show you. Elena will show me." It wasn't a request. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel Donovan's displeasure radiating off him in waves, could sense his betas tensing with protective instinct for their Alpha's authority. But what could any of them say? You didn't deny a Lycan king, especially not one with Nathaniel's reputation. "Of course," Donovan finally said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Elena, please escort His Majesty to the north wing, second door on the left." Ensure he has everything he needs." The dismissal was clear. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and gestured for Nathaniel to follow me. As we left the kitchen, I could feel Donovan's stare burning into my back. Could imagine the conversations that would happen the moment we were out of earshot. The pack house was quiet now, most wolves having retired to their quarters or departed entirely. Our footsteps echoed on the wooden floors as I led Nathaniel through hallways I rarely traversed, toward the guest wing where visiting dignitaries stayed. The accommodations here were luxurious compared to my cramped room, spacious chambers with real furniture, windows that looked out over the forest, thick carpets that muffled sound. "This is it," I said, stopping at the designated door. "There should be fresh linens, and the bathroom is stocked with—" "Come inside," Nathaniel said. "Please. Just for a moment." Every instinct screamed at me to refuse. Being found alone with him in a bedroom would destroy what little reputation I had, but those golden eyes held such earnest appeal that I found myself nodding, following him into the room and closing the door behind us. The space was indeed luxurious. A large bed with a thick mattress, chairs positioned near a fireplace, windows with actual curtains. Nathaniel ignored all of it, turning to face me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "I need to tell you something," he began. "And I need you to listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" I nodded, mute with apprehension. 15 years ago, my pack was slaughtered," he said, and the words were like shards of glass, sharp and cutting. Hunters with silver weapons and wolfsbane, coordinated and merciless. I was 20 years old, newly ascended to my father's title, and I survived only because I was away negotiating with a neighboring pack. When I returned, there was nothing left. No family, no friends, no pack. Just bodies and ashes and the smell of death. My hand rose to my mouth, horror filling me. "I tracked the hunters," he continued, his voice flat, emotionless in the way of someone recounting unbearable trauma. "I killed them all, every single one. And then I went to the mountains, and I stayed there because I couldn't bear to be around other wolves, couldn't bear to rebuild what had been destroyed, couldn't bear to pretend that life simply continued after such loss." "Nathaniel," I whispered, but he shook his head. "I'm telling you this because you need to understand. For 15 years I've been alone. I've attended these gatherings out of duty, met countless wolves, and felt nothing. Nothing but the crushing weight of survival and the emptiness of a life lived in isolation. Until tonight. Until I walked into that kitchen and saw you, and for the first time since the massacre, I felt something other than grief. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might break through my ribs." "What did you feel?" "Recognition," he said simply. "Like my soul knew yours, like I'd been wandering in darkness and suddenly found a light I didn't know I'd been searching for." The words should have sounded ridiculous, melodramatic, impossible, but the way he said them, with such raw honesty, made them feel like the truest thing I'd ever heard. "I'm nobody," I protested weakly. "I'm broken, defective. I can't even shift properly." "You're not broken," he interrupted fiercely. "You're just different. And different isn't the same as lesser. My pack doesn't see it that way. Then your pack is blind." He took a step closer, and I could smell the rain still clinging to him, mixed with pine and something uniquely his. "Elena, I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I know this is sudden, overwhelming, but I'm asking for a chance to know you, to spend time with you, to see if what I felt tonight is real or just the delusion of a lonely wolf desperate for connection. And if it's real?" The question escaped before I could stop it. His expression softened into something almost tender. "Then maybe we're both less alone than we thought." The moment stretched between us, weighted with possibility and fear and hope, so fragile it hurt. Outside, an owl called, its voice lonely in the darkness. Inside, I stood at a crossroads I'd never imagined reaching. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "I don't know how to be seen, how to matter to someone." "Neither do I," he confessed. "But maybe we can learn together." There was a knock at the door, sharp and insistent. I jumped back instinctively, putting distance between us, as Nathaniel called out permission to enter. One of Donovan's betas stepped inside, his expression carefully neutral. Apologies for the interruption, Your Majesty. Alpha Donovan requests Elena's presence in his office. Immediately. My stomach dropped. This was it. The reckoning I'd known was coming. Donovan would want to know what had transpired, would want to ensure I hadn't embarrassed the pack or overstepped my bounds. The consequences would be swift and certain. Tell Donovan that Elena is occupied seeing to my needs, Nathaniel said coldly. She'll report to him tomorrow morning. The beta hesitated, clearly torn between his alpha's command and a Lycan King's directive. Finally, he nodded and retreated, leaving us alone again. You shouldn't have done that, I said quietly. You're making this harder for me. Good. There was steel in his voice now, because I'm about to make it much harder. Tomorrow, when I meet with Donovan, I'm going to request permission for you to visit my territory, as my guest. The world tilted beneath my feet. What? No, that's... You can't... I can, and I will. His jaw set in a stubborn line. You said you don't know how to be seen, how to matter. Come with me, Elena. Let me show you a place where your worth isn't determined by pack politics or omega hierarchies. Let me show you what it's like to simply exist without judgment. For how long? The question was barely a whisper. As long as you want. His eyes held mine, unwavering. A day, a week, a month, forever, if you choose. But that choice would be yours, Elena. Always yours. The offer was everything I'd never dared to dream of. Freedom, possibility, escape from the endless cycle of invisibility and service. But it was also terrifying in its magnitude, in the way it demanded I step outside everything familiar, everything safe. I need time to think, I managed. Take all the time you need, he said gently. But know this. Whatever you decide, whatever happens tomorrow or the day after that, you are not nothing. You are not broken. And you sure as hell are worth far more than a place in someone else's kitchen. The conviction in his voice wrapped around me like a blanket, warm and protective. I wanted to believe him, wanted it so desperately it frightened me. I should go, I whispered. Before someone else comes looking, he nodded. But as I turned to leave, his hand caught mine, gentle, questioning, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. For just a moment, I let myself feel the warmth of his palm against mine, the calluses that spoke of a warrior's life, the slight tremor that revealed he was just as affected by this connection as I was. Good night, Elena, he said softly. Good night, Nathaniel. I slipped out into the hallway, my hand still tingling from his touch, my mind whirling with impossible possibilities. Behind me, the door clicked shut, and I stood there in the darkness, trying to remember how to breathe. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tonight, I let myself hope. I didn't sleep. How could I, when my entire world had shifted on its axis in the span of a few hours? I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every look, every moment of impossible connection with the king who claimed to see value in a broken omega. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through the crack beneath my door. I rose, washed my face in the small basin, and braided my hair with fingers that wouldn't quite steady. Today, I would face Donovan. Today, Nathaniel would make his request. Today I would have to decide whether to take the most terrifying leap of my life or retreat back into the safety of invisibility. The kitchen was my refuge, as always. I threw myself into preparing breakfast for the pack, letting the familiar rhythms calm my racing thoughts. Eggs, fresh bread, bacon, fruit. Simple fare that required little creativity but much precision. My hands moved automatically while my mind churned. You look terrible, came a voice from the doorway. Thomas, early as always, concern evident in his kind eyes. Didn't sleep? Not much, I admitted, cracking eggs into a bowl. He moved closer, lowering his voice. The whole pack is talking, Elena. About you and the Lycan King. Cassandra is furious. She'd been planning to catch his attention all week. And Alpha Donovan. He trailed off, worry creasing his forehead. What about Alpha Donovan? He's not happy. He sees you as pack property, you know that. The idea that someone else might value you, might want to take you away? Thomas shook his head. Just be careful. Please. The warning settled like ice in my stomach, but I nodded my thanks. Thomas meant well, even if his concern only reinforced what I already knew. I was a possession, not a person. A useful tool that the pack had no intention of relinquishing without a fight. Breakfast service proceeded normally, or as normally as anything could proceed, with half the pack whispering about me and shooting speculative glances toward the kitchen. I kept my head down, focused on my work, and tried not to think about golden eyes and gentle hands and promises of worth. The summons came mid-morning. A stiff-faced beta I didn't know well appeared in the kitchen doorway and informed me that Alpha Donovan required my presence in his office immediately. Nathaniel would be there as well. My heart hammered as I removed my apron, smoothed my simple dress, and followed the beta through the pack house. Donovan's office was on the second floor, a large room dominated by a massive desk and shelves lined with books and territorial maps. The Alpha sat behind his desk, expression unreadable. Nathaniel stood by the window, looking out over the forest, his posture rigid. "Elena," Donovan said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit." I sat, hands folded in my lap, trying to project calm I didn't feel. "His Majesty has made an interesting request," Donovan continued, his tone measured. "He wishes for you to visit his territory as his personal guest for an indefinite period." I said nothing, waiting. "As your Alpha, I'm concerned about this arrangement." Donovan leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "You're a valued member of this pack, Elena. Your skills in the kitchen are significant. To lose you, even temporarily, would be disruptive." "She's not a prisoner," Nathaniel said quietly, still not turning from the window. "She's a person with autonomy and the right to make her own choices." "Of course," Donovan agreed smoothly. "But she's also pack. We have responsibilities to one another. Obligations." "What obligations has the pack fulfilled toward her?" Nathaniel turned now, and the cold fury in his eyes made me shiver. "I saw where she sleeps, Donovan. I saw how she's treated. Don't speak to me of obligations when you've housed her like unwanted storage and worked her like a servant." Donovan's expression hardened. "How we manage our pack members is internal business. It becomes my business when I take an interest in one of those members." Nathaniel's voice was steel. "Elena is coming with me. The only question is whether this happens with your blessing or your opposition. Choose wisely." The tension in the room was suffocating. I could see Donovan calculating, weighing his options. He couldn't afford to antagonize a Lycan king, but neither could he afford to appear weak before his pack. I was caught in the middle, a pawn in a power play I'd never asked to be part of. "Elena," Donovan said finally, his gaze shifting to me. "What do you want?" The question hung in the air, simple yet loaded with implications. What did I want? I'd spent so long accepting what was given, never daring to reach for more, that the concept of desire felt foreign, dangerous. I looked at Nathaniel, at the way he stood like a warrior prepared for battle, fighting for me when no one else ever had. I looked at Donovan, at the cold calculation in his eyes that reminded me I would always be a commodity here, never a person. "I want to go," I said, and my voice was stronger than I'd expected. "I want to accept Nathaniel's invitation." Donovan's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. "Very well. But understand this, Elena. If you choose to leave permanently, you forfeit your place here. There will be no coming back. The threat was clear. Choose the king. Lose your pack. Choose the unknown. Lose your safety net." It should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something almost like relief. "I understand," I said quietly. Then it settled. Nathaniel moved away from the window, his hand coming to rest on my shoulder. A gesture of protection, of claim, of solidarity. "We'll leave tomorrow morning. Elena will need time to prepare." "Of course." Donovan stood, extending his hand to Nathaniel in a gesture of false cordiality. "I trust you'll take good care of our Elena." "Your Elena is no longer your concern," Nathaniel replied, ignoring the offered hand. "She's under my protection now." The meeting ended there, tense and unresolved, but with the essential facts established. I was leaving, Tomorrow, my life would change irrevocably. As we left Donovan's office, I felt eyes following us through the pack house. Some curious, some envious, some openly hostile. Cassandra stood in the hallway, her beautiful face twisted with contempt. "Enjoy your moment," she hissed as we passed. "Kings tire of their toys eventually. You'll come crawling back and we'll laugh when Donovan turns you away." Nathaniel stopped, turned, and the sheer force of his dominance made Cassandra take an involuntary step backward. "Speak to her like that again," he said softly, "and you'll answer to me personally. Am I clear?" Cassandra's face went white. She nodded jerkily, then fled down the hallway, her pride in tatters. "You didn't have to do that," I murmured as we continued walking. "Yes, I did." His hand found mine, threading our fingers together. "No one disrespects you in my presence. Not now, not ever." The rest of the day passed in a blur. I packed my meager belongings, a few changes of clothes, a hairbrush, little else. Everything I owned fit into a single worn bag. The poverty of it should have embarrassed me, but instead it felt liberating. I was leaving with nothing, which meant I had nothing to lose. Evening found me in the kitchen one last time, preparing dinner not because I had to, but because I wanted to. It was my farewell to this place that had been both prison and sanctuary. I put everything I had into the meal: roasted chicken with herbs, vegetables from the garden, fresh bread that filled the air with its warm scent. Nathaniel appeared as I was finishing, drawn by the smells, or perhaps by something else, some invisible thread that seemed to connect us now. He watched me work in silence, and the companionship of it felt natural, right. "Will you miss this?" he asked eventually. "The cooking?" "I'll miss the kitchen," I admitted. "Not the pack, not the treatment, but this space, the creativity, the way food can communicate things words can't." "There's a kitchen in my home," he said. "Large, well-equipped, rarely used. It could be yours if you wanted." The offer was casual, but the implications made my heart race. A kitchen of my own. A space where I could create without judgment, without the weight of pack politics and hierarchies. "I'd like that," I whispered. He smiled, and the transformation was stunning. This fierce, lonely king had smiled at me, and I felt the warmth of it down to my bones. We ate together that night, just the two of us in the empty kitchen after the pack had been fed. Simple food, simple conversation, but underneath it all was a current of something profound, something that felt like the beginning of everything. "Tell me about your mountains," I said, watching him over the rim of my cup. His expression grew distant, thoughtful. "They're beautiful. Harsh, but beautiful. Snow most of the year. Forests so dense you can walk for days without seeing the sky. There's a lake near my home, crystal clear, fed by glacial melt. In summer, wildflowers bloom in impossible colors." He paused, golden eyes finding mine. "It's lonely. I won't lie about that, but it's also peaceful. No politics, no performances, no pretending to be anything other than what you are." "It sounds wonderful," I said honestly. "It will be better with you there." The certainty in his voice wrapped around me like a promise. Later, much later, he walked me back to my small room one last time. We stood in the narrow doorway, neither of us quite ready to say goodnight. "Are you frightened?" he asked softly. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also hopeful." "Is that strange?" "No." His hand came up to cup my cheek, thumb brushing across my skin with devastating gentleness. "It's brave. You're brave, Elena, even if you don't see it yet." I leaned into his touch, letting myself feel safe for just a moment. "What if I disappoint you? What if I'm not what you think I am?" "Impossible." His voice was firm. "You're exactly who you are, and that's all I want. No performances, remember? Just you, real and honest and here." The kiss, when it came, was soft and questioning, his lips barely brushing mine before pulling back to gauge my reaction. My first kiss, at 22, with a king in a storage closet that had been my home. It should have been absurd. Instead, it felt perfect. "Sleep," he murmured against my forehead. "Tomorrow is a new beginning." He left me there, trembling and alive and more terrified than I'd ever been. I packed the last of my things, changed into my night clothes, and lay down on the narrow bed for the final time. Through the thin walls, I could hear the pack house settling for the night. Footsteps, voices, the familiar sounds of communal living. Tomorrow I would leave all of this behind. Tomorrow I would step into the unknown with a king who saw value in a broken Omega. Tomorrow I would discover if I was brave enough to believe him. I closed my eyes and let myself dream of mountains and wildflowers, and a life where I was seen, valued, whole, and for the first time in years, the dreams didn't feel impossible. They felt like tomorrow. The journey north took 3 days. We traveled in Nathaniel's vehicle, a sturdy truck built for mountain roads, leaving behind the Clearwater territory as dawn broke across the forest. I watched the pack house disappear in the side mirror, felt the weight of my old life falling away with each mile. Thomas had hugged me goodbye, eyes bright with unshed tears. The rest of the pack had watched in silence, some curious, some resentful, all uncertain about what my departure meant. Donovan had not come to see me off. Nathaniel drove with quiet confidence, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching across to squeeze mine, a gesture of reassurance that became more natural with each repetition. We talked during those long hours, sharing pieces of ourselves in the safe cocoon of the truck's interior. He told me about his childhood, about parents who'd loved fiercely and died violently. I told him about my mother, about growing up different, about the slow erosion of self-worth that came from being constantly reminded of your inadequacy. My father used to say that strength isn't about dominance, Nathaniel said, as we climbed higher into the mountains, the air growing thinner and colder. It's about knowing when to stand firm and when to bend, when to fight and when to show mercy. His hands tightened on the wheel. I forgot that. After the massacre, I became all hardness, all edges. But watching you in that kitchen, seeing how you turned something as simple as cooking into an act of love and care, it reminded me of what I'd lost. I'm not strong, I protested. I spent my whole life accepting mistreatment because I was too afraid to stand up for myself. You survived, he countered. You found purpose and meaning in impossible circumstances. You created beauty where others saw only function. That's not weakness, Elena. That's resilience. The word settled into my chest, taking root in soil that had been barren for too long. On the second night, we stopped at a small inn run by wolves who greeted Nathaniel with genuine warmth, their eyes widening when he introduced me as his guest. The innkeeper's mate, a kindly older Omega named Ruth, showed me to a room and lingered to chat. He's been alone too long, that one, she said, smoothing the quilts on the bed. We've worried about him, isolated up in those mountains with only ghosts for company, but the way he looks at you, she smiled, her eyes crinkling. That's not loneliness anymore, that's hope. That night, Nathaniel knocked on my door and asked if I'd like to see the stars. We climbed to the inn's roof, bundled in blankets against the cold, and lay side by side looking up at a sky so vast and brilliant it took my breath away. He pointed out constellations, told me the old wolf legends associated with each one, his voice soft in the darkness. My mother used to say the stars were the eyes of ancestors watching over us, he murmured. After she died, I found that comforting. The idea that she was still there, somehow. Still seeing me. I found his hand beneath the blankets, threaded my fingers through his. Do you think they approve of this? Of us? I think, he said slowly, that they would want me to be happy, Elena. Happier than I've been in 15 years. We kissed under those stars, and this time there was no hesitation. No uncertainty, just warmth and want, and the tentative beginning of something that felt like healing. The third day brought us to his territory. The mountains rose around us like ancient sentinels, their peaks white with snow that never fully melted. Pine forests so dense they seemed to swallow sound. And there, nestled in a valley beside the crystal lake he'd described, stood his home. It was smaller than I'd expected. More cabin than castle, built from timber and stone that blended seamlessly into the landscape. Smoke curled from the chimney, and I realized with a start that he must have someone maintaining the place in his absence. It's not much, he said, suddenly uncertain. not compared to a traditional pack dwelling, but it's home. It's beautiful, I breathed, and meant it. He carried my bag inside, and I followed, stepping into a space that was both rustic and welcoming. Large windows overlooked the lake. A fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable furniture arranged before it. And through an archway, I glimpsed what had to be the kitchen, large and sunlit, with copper pots hanging from hooks and counters that begged to be used. The caretaker left supplies, Nathaniel said, gesturing vaguely. But I sent word that we wouldn't need her services while you're here. I wanted it to be just us, if that's all right. More than all right, I assured him, already moving toward the kitchen like a compass finding north. It was perfect, better than perfect. Everything I could have dreamed of and more. I ran my fingers along the counters, examined the spice rack, opened cupboards to find them well stocked with ingredients that made my creative mind spin with possibilities. I could make something, I said, turning to find him watching me with an expression of such tender amusement it made my heart skip. For dinner, if you'd like. I'd love nothing more. He moved closer, wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on top of my head. But first, let me show you the rest of the house. Your room is upstairs, though I hope you'll consider it more of a formality than a necessity. Heat flooded my cheeks at the implication, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned back into his embrace, letting myself feel safe, wanted, home. The days that followed developed a rhythm all their own. I cooked, experimenting with new recipes and old favorites, pouring love into every dish. Nathaniel chopped wood, maintained the property, and watched me with eyes that grew warmer with each passing hour. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, filling in the gaps of each other's histories. We walked by the lake, swam in its frigid waters, lay in meadows dotted with wildflowers as he'd promised, and slowly, carefully, we learned each other in ways that went beyond words. He was gentle with me, always. But there was passion beneath the gentleness, a hunger that matched my own, a need that had been denied for too long. Our first time was clumsy and sweet, both of us navigating unfamiliar territory with patience and humor. But it was also profound, a joining that felt like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. I love you, he whispered against my skin afterward. And the words didn't frighten me the way I'd expected them to. I love you too, I whispered back, and felt the truth of it settle into my bones. 2 weeks into my stay, a messenger arrived from Clearwater. Nathaniel met him outside while I watched from the window, anxiety coiling in my stomach. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Donovan wants you back," he said flatly. "He's claiming that your absence has disrupted pack operations, that you left under duress, that I coerced you." My hands clenched into fists. That's ridiculous. He knows I chose to leave, I know. But he's using pack law to make trouble, threatening to bring a formal complaint before the regional council. Nathaniel's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger. He sees you as property, Elena. As a resource he's entitled to. What do we do? He pulled me close, fierce and protective. We go back, we face him, and we make it clear publicly and formally that you're not pack anymore. You're mine. The word should have bothered me, the possessiveness of it, the claim. But in Nathaniel's mouth, it didn't mean ownership. It meant belonging. It meant home. We returned to Clearwater 3 days later, and this time there was no skulking arrival in the rain. Nathaniel strode into the pack house with me at his side, his hand firm on the small of my back, his dominance rolling off him in waves that made even the alphas in the room lower their eyes. Donovan waited in the great hall, flanked by his counsel, looking smug and confident. That confidence faltered when he saw us, saw the way I stood tall beside Nathaniel, the way I met his gaze without flinching, the subtle changes that 3 weeks of being valued had wrought. "Elena," Donovan said, his tone falsely warm, "we're glad you've returned. I trust His Majesty treated you well during your visit." "More than well," I replied, my voice steady. "He treated me like I mattered, like I was worth something beyond my utility." Murmurs rippled through the assembled wolves. Cassandra stood near the back, her expression sour. "Be that as it may," Donovan continued, "your place is here, with your pack. We've been managing without your skills, but it's been difficult. Surely you can see that your duty—" "Her duty," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice cutting through the hall like a blade, "is to herself, not to a pack that treated her like a servant, not to an alpha who housed her in a storage closet and denied her basic dignity." Donovan's face flushed with anger. "How we manage our pack is not your concern. It became my concern the moment I claimed her." Nathaniel's words rang out, clear and undeniable. "Elena is my mate. She bears my mark and my protection. She is no longer Clearwater Pack. She is mine, and I am hers, and any who challenge that will answer to me personally." The silence that followed was absolute. I felt the weight of every eye in the room, felt the significance of what Nathaniel had just declared. Mates, not just guests or lovers, but mates, a bond recognized by all wolf law as sacred and unbreakable. "Show them," Nathaniel murmured to me, and I understood. With trembling fingers, I pulled aside the collar of my dress, revealing the mark at the junction of my neck and shoulder, the bite Nathaniel had given me 3 nights ago, when passion had transformed into something deeper, more permanent. The mark that declared to all wolves that I was claimed, protected, loved. Donovan's face went white, then red. "This is... You can't..." "I can, and I have." Nathaniel's voice was steel. "Elena is no longer yours to command or control. She's no longer anyone's property. She's my mate, my equal, and she will be treated with the respect that position demands." I found my own voice then, stronger than it had ever been. "I'm grateful to this pack for the shelter it provided, but I won't be returning. My home is with Nathaniel now. My life is with him, and I'm not asking permission or forgiveness for choosing happiness over obligation." Thomas, standing near the front, grinned and began to clap. Others joined him, slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. The Omegas who'd always been kind, the Betas who'd seen how I was treated, even a few Alphas who respected strength in whatever form it took. Donovan had no choice but to accept defeat gracefully. "Then I wish you well," he said stiffly. "May your union bring you both happiness." We left that hall together, and this time there was no looking back. No regret, no second-guessing, no fear. Just the solid warmth of Nathaniel's hand in mine and the certain knowledge that I had found where I belonged. The months that followed were the happiest of my life. I turned Nathaniel's kitchen into my domain, creating dishes that brought wolves from neighboring territories just to taste them. Word spread of the Lycan King's mate, who could make magic with simple ingredients, and our home became a gathering place for those seeking refuge, counsel, or simply good food and better company. Nathaniel opened up in ways he'd never thought possible, his isolation ending not with a bang but with the gentle persistence of love and partnership. He taught me to defend myself, to fight when necessary, to tap into the wolf inside me that had always been there but never encouraged. And I taught him to laugh again, to find joy in small moments, to believe that happiness wasn't a betrayal of those he'd lost, but a tribute to them. On our first anniversary, he took me to the meadow where wildflowers bloomed in impossible colors. There, surrounded by beauty and peace, he knelt before me with tears in his eyes. "You saved me," he said simply. "When I walked into that kitchen, I was barely alive, existing, but not living. You reminded me what it meant to feel, to hope, to love." "You're not worth much?" He shook his head, a smile breaking through the tears. "Elena, you're worth everything. You're my heart, my home, my reason for waking each morning with gratitude instead of grief." I pulled him to his feet, kissed him with all the love that overflowed from my chest. "We saved each other," I whispered against his lips. "I was invisible, and you saw me. You were alone, and I found you. That's what mates do." And there, in that meadow beneath an endless sky, surrounded by the mountains that had become our sanctuary, we celebrated not just our anniversary but our transformation. From broken to whole, from lonely to beloved, from lost to found. I had walked into his life offering only the ability to cook, but what we'd built together was a feast for the soul. Nourishment that went far deeper than food, sustenance that would carry us through whatever challenges lay ahead. I was Elena, mate to the Lycan King. Not because of what I could do, but because of who I was. Not despite my differences, but including them. Not as property or servant or broken omega, but as partner, equal, beloved. And that, I finally understood, was worth everything.